Are you hurt?
We'll get you inside now. Careful, careful.
Do you believe that an old dog could reach the heart of a creature no human has ever touched? In a forgotten corner of the Oregon wilderness, a friendship was born, one that defied species, time, and even death itself. Contrary to everything we think we know, the first recorded moment a juvenile Bigfoot stayed near humans wasn't out of fear, but loyalty. Wounded and freezing, it was found being shielded by a husky named Briggs, who had disappeared into a blizzard for 3 days, refusing to leave its side. This isn't just folklore. It was witnessed by Wren Carter, only 14 at the time, and later documented through her camera lens. She lived it, frame by frame, in the snowbound forests of Wallowa. In this video, you'll see never-before-seen photos, original 1987 film reels, and a story kept secret by locals and rescuers for decades. Even if you don't believe in Bigfoot, you'll believe in this bond. Wren was trapped in that storm, alone. Everyone feared Briggs was gone. But when the snow cleared, it was Briggs who led them to the creature, trembling, hurt, and very much alive. From that moment, the meaning of monster was never the same. This is the first time the full story is being told. If you skip this, you'll never know what truly happened in those strange spring seasons in Wallowa. Watch now, because some friendships only happen once in a lifetime. Winter wind dragged low across the ridgeline like a tired sigh. It caught in the girl's scarf, flapping it against her cheek as she squinted through falling light. Wren Carter, 14 years old, small for her age but steady-handed, leaned forward on the sled's worn wooden seat, camera slung across her chest, the leather strap pressed cold against her collarbone. Ahead, the snow path glowed silver between dark trees, lined with frost-dusted fence posts, each one hand-set years ago by her grandfather Hal with a post-hole digger and a bad back. The only sound came from the smooth glide of the sled runners and the rhythmic huff of Briggs, the husky dog pulling her home. His paws struck snow with practiced ease, tail low, ears flicking at the wind. The sun had slipped behind the trees, casting long blue shadows across the trail. Wren lifted her camera, thumbed the dial. She'd been meaning to catch the light through the frozen aspens all week. A golden hour, Hal called it, though there wasn't much gold in this kind of cold. Still, it made her think of her grandmother, who once said light like this could whisper things you forgot to remember. She lined up a shot, focused through the viewfinder, pressed the shutter. The soft click snapped through the hush. Briggs stopped. She lowered the camera. He stood stiff, nose lifted high, body angled sideways to the wind like he was listening to something she couldn't hear. Wren blinked. "What is it, bud?" The husky let out a low, questioning growl. Then he was gone. One leap, then another. Then his red harness tore loose from the sled's crossbeam with a dry snap. Wren shouted his name, stumbling as she dropped the camera to her chest. The sled tilted. She clawed at the wood to stay upright, eyes darting through the trees. But Briggs had vanished between the pines, a blur swallowed by snow and silence. "Briggs!" she cried, voice cracking. The wind stole the rest. She jumped from the sled, boots sinking past her ankles. Her breath came fast, fogging up the air around her. "Briggs, come back!" she yelled again, spinning, listening. But all she heard was the start of the storm, the sharp hiss of snow flurries scraping dry branches. Then a crack, far off. Or maybe not far, maybe just loud. The cold deepened like a hand tightening. She turned in place, heart hammering. Already the trail behind her was starting to vanish, the wind sweeping soft powder into the sled tracks. She looked once more in the direction Briggs had gone, into the gathering white. Then down at the posts. 1, 2, 3. Like breadcrumbs. Wren forced her legs to move. She followed the markers, shouting until her throat hurt. The gusts answered her with nothing but their own ragged breath. The 4th post, then the 5th. She lost count after that. Somewhere between breath and frost, she stopped yelling. The woods were closing in. Even the birds had gone quiet. Just the whispering scrape of her boots, the flapping of her scarf, the churning of her thoughts. She gripped the sled rope and pulled. When the house finally appeared, gray shingles, leaning porch, light in one window. She didn't register the relief. Just kept walking, stiff, mechanical, until her grandfather opened the door. Hal Carter had known the look on her face before she even spoke. He stepped outside fast, in slippers, not caring about the snow that soaked his socks. "Where's Briggs?" His voice was sharp, but it cracked at the edge. Wren opened her mouth. No words came, just a shake of the head. For a second, he didn't move, didn't blink. Something broke loose behind his eyes, and his shoulders dropped like he'd been hit. Years folded back. Back to another storm, another dog, another shout swallowed by wind. Wren looked down, shivering now, the wind biting her ears through the wool hat. "He smelled something," she said finally, barely a whisper. "He ran." Hal nodded once. Not at her, at something far away. She didn't see the way his hand trembled when he closed the door behind her. Later, after dry clothes and a fire lit low in the stove, Hal stepped back outside. The wind had slowed, but the snow kept falling, soft, fine, relentless. He walked to the edge of the porch, then past it. The floodlight spilled over the yard like a memory. His boots crunched faint trails between the drifts. And there, just past the last post, he saw them, paw prints, deep and fresh, not drifted over yet. He knelt beside them, knees aching. Briggs' tracks were clear, sharp-edged, the pads and claw marks unmistakable. But beside them, overlapping slightly, then veering away, was something else. Something larger. Something barefoot. A single set. Huge. Widespread toes, heels sunk deep. Human, almost. But not. Hal's breath caught in his chest. He scanned the tree line. Nothing moved. The wind sighed again, slower now, like an exhale through old teeth. He stood, rubbing his chest, not from cold, but something heavier. A pressure he couldn't name. Inside, Wren sat at the window. She hadn't lit the lamp. The old scarf her grandmother knitted was wrapped tight around her shoulders, though she couldn't feel the warmth anymore. The house creaked under the settling storm. A log snapped in the stove. She didn't look away from the glass. In her hands, she clutched the frayed cord from Briggs' harness. The red dye had faded from the sun. The brass tag clinked gently with each movement of her fingers. She pressed her forehead to the pane, watching nothing, watching everything. Outside, snow gathered on the sill. No footprints now, no wind, just white. She whispered into the quiet. "Please, don't leave me alone." The words fell like ashes into her lap, and somewhere far beyond the window, something old and tall and silent was listening. Snowmelt whispered through the underbrush like breath returning to a cold body. The hills of Wallowa Valley no longer held the sharp white edge of winter, but the bones of it still lingered in the low hollows, in the way frost clung to the north sides of tree trunks and how the mud beneath the pines refused to dry. The wind carried the scent of thaw and wood rot, of old pine needles waking beneath soggy ground. The river cracked in the distance, not loudly, like a rib shifting under a thick quilt. It was May Jarrell who heard it first, a sharp, ragged sound out in the trees, like something trying to bark but forgetting how. She stopped in her tracks, one hand up. The old cedar switch she carried for brush trembled a little. Hal was beside her, squinting toward the bend in the trail, boots sunk deep in slush. Wren stood just behind him, still and silent, her camera left back at the house. They'd come out with nothing but rope, warm blankets, and quiet hope. After May said she heard something beyond the ridgeline that wasn't owl or fox. Another sound. A cough, maybe, or a sob disguised as one. Then they saw the dog. Briggs stood near a fallen log, caked in mud, ribs showing under damp fur, one eye squinting hard against the wind. He didn't bark this time, just turned and took a step, then another, pausing to glance back. His tail didn't wag, he didn't bound forward like he used to. But there was something in his walk, measured, careful, that made Wren's heart seize in her chest. She was the first to follow. Hal called after her, voice low but firm. But she kept going, boots sinking in blackened snowmelt. The ground sloped gently and then steeply, thick with moss and ferns flattened by the weight of the past season. The smell changed down there. It grew thick, earthy, like something alive and hidden. Wren ducked beneath a branch, one hand out for balance, and when she looked up, there it was, a hollow, carved into the base of a spruce that had outlived 3 wars and half the town. It wasn't much, just a curve in the roots wide enough to cradle something small, but that something filled the space completely. It was lying down, curled, not tightly, but carefully, like it had learned not to take up too much space. The fur, if it was fur, was dark and thick, matted in some places, gleaming in others. One leg stuck out at a bad angle, the ankle swollen twice its size. But what got Wren, what made her stop breathing, was how its arms were wrapped around itself, like a child, or something trying very hard to seem smaller than it was. Briggs stood just beside it, then eased himself down, pressing his body against the creature's side. He didn't look at Wren, just rested his head there and sighed. Not a dog's sigh, a tired one, an old one. May caught up, breathless, then Hal. He stood still a long time. Then, slow as prayer, he peeled the heavy coat from his shoulders and stepped forward. Wren thought the creature might flinch, might run, but it didn't. It opened one eye, just barely. Not blue, not brown. Something else. Something not made to reflect flashlight beams or porchlight bulbs. It blinked once, slow. Hal knelt beside it. "Hey now," he said softly, voice hoarse. "It's all right." He draped the coat over its shoulders. The creature didn't move, but its hands, large, wide-palmed, more hand than paw, clutched the wool like it remembered what warmth was. Hal touched the edge of its injured leg. It didn't cry out, just twitched. May came behind him with the rope, already looping it into a makeshift harness. Wren pulled a bottle of warm water from her pack, knelt beside the creature and held it out. It looked at her, not the bottle, then at Briggs, then it drank. They worked in silence, save for a few short instructions from Hal, the kind born from years of farming and fixing things with what you had. They tied the blanket like a sling, fastened rope to either end, dragged a path through the wet earth. It wasn't elegant, but it held. Wren walked backwards half the time, watching the creature's eyes, watching for signs of panic, but there weren't any. It lay still, breathing slow, trusting. The trip back took the better part of 2 hours. The light was fading again. Shadows gathered under the trees. Once, they paused near the fence line where the post markers began. Wren looked behind them, back toward the deeper woods. That's when Hal saw it. He didn't say anything right away, just froze. It stood far off, half obscured by fog rising from the thawed soil. Not moving, tall, taller than any man, broader than the spruce trees, no eyes visible, no teeth, just presence, stillness. A waiting shape carved from shadow. He blinked. It was gone. The others hadn't noticed. He didn't mention it. Not yet. They brought the creature. Not child, not beast, not any word that fit. Down the root cellar steps. The air inside was cool but dry. The walls packed dirt and old stone. A single cot with a wool quilt lay against one wall. Opposite shelves lined with jars from last fall's canning. The door stayed open. A promise. Not a prison. Wren sat on the steps while May boiled water upstairs. Hal radioed for Tessa. She came just after dusk, headlights cutting the fog, hair in a loose braid, wearing that old denim jacket she'd never give up. She didn't ask questions, not the ones that mattered. Just nodded when she saw the cellar and said, "So, the heifer's back, huh?" Hal grunted. "Looks like." Tessa crouched beside the creature, hands gentle. She didn't try to touch it at first, just looked. Took in the swelling, the bruising, the stillness. "Old fracture," she muttered, mostly to herself. "Re-aggravated. Maybe fell, maybe hit." She nodded again, then reached for her vet bag. "Gonna do this like we would a calf, all right?" No one corrected her. She wrapped the leg in strips of cut linen, fastened it with a few clean pine slats, tied tight with cord. When she was done, she gave Wren a wink. "Good as new, with some rest." Wren smiled, small, but it held. That night the house stayed quiet. Hal sat at the window again, but not watching the yard, just listening. May made soup. Briggs lay on the floor near the cellar door, ears twitching in his sleep. Downstairs the creature slept too, or rested, hard to say. In the dark, Wren crept to the edge of the stairs, blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She didn't speak, just watched. The way the creature's chest rose and fell. The way Briggs had returned to its side, one paw stretched just so, head resting near the cot. Breathing in unison, like they'd done this before, like it wasn't new, like it was something known. Upstairs, a kettle whistled. Wren didn't move, not yet. Outside, the wind shifted, and far away, in the thinning dark, something stood still once more, listening, watching, waiting. Summer settled like breath held too long, not hot, but thick in the air around the Carter house. The earth pulsed with bugs and birds and sap rising, with things growing even in the cracks. The root cellar no longer smelled of cold or damp, just dry dirt and the soft decay of wood. Light filtered in from the narrow windows Hal had carved out years ago, golden in the mornings, turning to amber by late afternoon. The creature, juvenile now, not quite child, not yet wild, sat with its back to the wall, knees bent, fingers fidgeting with the hem of the same quilt Wren had laid across it that first night. It no longer needed it for warmth, but never let it stray far. Hal had built a simple wooden box, more of a block than a toy, with a single sliding latch carved into the side. Just a bar, a lock with no key. He left it on the cellar floor with no explanation, just a glance toward the creature before retreating to the workbench near the stairs. The creature stared at the box a long while, unmoving, then reached out, slow. Thick fingers brushed the wood. It sniffed it once, deeply, then looked over at Hal, who was fixing the leg on an old stool but not really watching. Then the creature tried, pushed the latch. Wrong way. Again. Still wrong. It paused, looking at the lines where the pieces met, then tried again. The bar shifted, clicked. The lid lifted. It looked up. Hal said nothing, just nodded once, then went back to his stool. Wren watched from behind the cracked door. She hadn't meant to spy, but something about that moment, how small the box looked in the creature's hands, how quiet it had been until the click, made her hold her breath. There was something about watching it learn. Not like a pet, not like a child. More like watching someone remember a language they'd always known, but hadn't used in a long, long time. Briggs lay sprawled on the cool flagstone, tail twitching every so often. The creature liked to touch his ears, just once or twice, never more. Briggs never flinched. Later, Hal made a second block. This one had 2 latches. The creature smiled the first time it solved it, a smile that showed no teeth, just the edges of something old and soft. Days folded in on themselves. May stopped by more often, dropping off goat milk in old jelly jars, never lingering too long. She'd lean on the door frame, squint into the cellar's shaded gloom, then nod, mostly to herself. "Still breathing?" she'd ask. Still learnin', Hal would answer. One evening, Wren was watching through the stair railing, knees tucked under her, fingers curled around the banister, when she saw it happen. The creature, left alone for just a moment, stood, walked to the cellar door, and lifted the latch. Not the box this time, the real one. It pushed the door open, paused, then pulled it shut again, hard, then opened it, then shut it again, gently. It turned, looked toward Briggs, then back at the door. It reached out and latched it. The click echoed up the stairs. Wren's heart skipped once. She didn't know why. Maybe because it wasn't fear she felt. It was something deeper. Recognition. Later, she brought it a bowl of blueberries. It didn't eat them, just picked each one up carefully and lined them in a row on the windowsill, then looked at her. She didn't ask why. She didn't need to. By mid-July, the swelling in its leg had gone down. It still walked with a limp, but moved faster now. More fluid, less guarded. Tessa had stopped by again that week, brought antiseptic and checked the scarring. Well, she said, brushing mud from her jeans. He's either the world's ugliest runaway, or a miracle in motion. I'm not sure which. Wren said nothing. Neither did Hal. Tessa narrowed her eyes. You folks think you're real funny, huh? Hal said. Only when the radio's busted. Tessa didn't laugh, but she didn't press either. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, the chickens raised hell. Hal was the first out the door, shotgun in hand, but pointed down. May was next, boots half-laced, muttering curses under her breath. Wren followed barefoot, holding a flashlight that barely cut through the haze. They reached the coop at the same time, heartbeats drumming louder than the hen clucks. But nothing was missing. No broken gate, no feathers strewn, just birds wide-eyed and flapping like they'd seen a ghost. Hal shone his light across the ground. No tracks, no blood, no raccoon fur or coyote scat. Just quiet, and a sense that something had passed through. They stood there a while, letting the hens calm. May muttered something about weasels. Hal said maybe a fox. Wren said nothing. Next morning she stepped outside before anyone else, walked across the dew-wet yard, and found it. One feather. Single, white, clean, laid gently on the porch rail. No mud, no blood, no claw marks. Just one perfect hen feather, left like an offering, or a note. She picked it up slowly, holding it between two fingers, careful not to crush it. She looked toward the tree line, then back to the feather. She didn't tell Hal. She just walked back inside, climbed the stairs to her room, and laid the feather on the shelf beside the old camera, next to the fading dog tag Briggs used to wear. She stared at it for a long time. Later that week, she caught a picture. It wasn't much. Just a blur between the cellar and the edge of the woods, dark and broad, head tilted. The light hit wrong, the shadow too long, but it was enough to feel like proof. Not for the world, just for herself. She didn't show anyone. Didn't need to. The creature, he now in her mind, had begun to move differently, with weight but not fear. He watched birds through the high window, mimicked the fluttering of their wings with his fingers. He tapped rhythms on the cellar wall. When Wren passed him a slice of apple, he took it and split it in two, giving half back. Briggs had started to follow him, not the other way around. One afternoon, Wren leaned against the doorway and watched them. Briggs nudged a ball toward the creature, an old, sun-faded thing from years past. He didn't fetch anymore, just pushed it close, waited. The creature looked at the ball, then at Briggs, then pushed it back a little clumsily. They did this 3 times. On the 4th, Briggs stopped, looked straight at him, eyes steady, not wagging, just waiting. The creature froze, then reached out, touched the dog's shoulder, palm wide and warm. Briggs didn't move. They stayed like that for a long time. Wren didn't speak. She didn't need to. That night, as the sun dipped low, painting the fields in gold, Wren sat on the edge of the porch, the camera resting in her lap, the feather beside her. She looked down toward the cellar. its door cracked open now by habit, never locked. Light spilled from it like a story unfinished. Inside, she knew, the creature was sleeping, and Briggs was breathing next to him. The same rhythm, same breath, not a cage, not anymore. And outside, somewhere past the trees, past the hills, something larger than silence stood still and waited. Not far, not close, but there, always there. The wind that came off Imnaha Canyon in early October was a different kind of wind. It didn't just brush your cheek or tangle your hair. It moved through you, like something old and wide had drawn a long breath, and now let it go slow across the ridge. It carried the dust of dry pine needles and the scent of river rock, carried the memory of hooves, of snowmelt, of thunder that never quite arrived. The light was slanted that afternoon, low and gold, cutting long shadows down the slope as if trying to stretch the day a little further before letting it fall. Hal stood near the fence line, arms folded, eyes narrowed against the sun. He hadn't spoken in a while, just stood there, watching. Not at the tree line, not at the shed or the barn or the empty water troughs. He was watching the canyon, that wide mouth of stone and silence where everything disappeared eventually. Mist, sound, time. He didn't move when Wren stepped beside him, didn't flinch when she slid her hand into his. Her fingers barely reached halfway around his palm now, not like they used to. Still, he held on. Down the slope, the cellar door stood open. The quilt was gone from the cot. So was the bowl of apples May had left the night before. Only thing left was the faint impression of weight in the pillow, like a body that had risen carefully, without waking the dust. The rope latch still hung from its hook, untouched. The creature had learned to open it weeks ago, but it had waited. Until this morning. Briggs paced near the porch, tail low, ears back. He kept looking toward the canyon, then back toward the cellar, then at Hal, then again, as if expecting someone to come walking up the hill, as if waiting for a sound he didn't quite believe he'd heard. Wren tugged gently at Hal's sleeve. "He's ready," she said, quiet. "He can't stay." Hal didn't answer right away, just blinked into the wind. "I know," he said finally. "Doesn't mean it sits right." Tessa pulled up not long after, her truck bumping slow down the gravel lane. She didn't honk, didn't shout, just parked and got out with a canvas satchel over her shoulder and a look on her face like she knew this wasn't about medicine. She didn't ask questions either, just followed Wren's nod down the path. They left early the next morning before the light had fully crept into the hollows. The sky was pale, almost the color of ash, and the frost had curled the edge of every leaf like paper held too close to a flame. The creature stood at the fence line already, not waiting but watching, a little taller now, shoulders straighter, the limp in his step mostly gone. He turned as Wren approached, Briggs trotting at her heels. His eyes met hers, and there was something steady in them. Not wild, not tame, something that understood goodbye. Briggs stopped, sniffed once, then took a step forward. The creature lowered his head, not fast, just enough for their foreheads to touch. For a second, everything held still. No birds, no wind, no breath. Then they pulled apart, just a little. The creature reached out, open hand to open hand. Wren didn't flinch, just placed her palm against his. Their fingers didn't match, but something between them did. Hal was already halfway down the hill, boots crunching on frozen earth. May waited by the edge of the trail with a wool scarf folded neatly in her lap, though she said she wasn't cold. She didn't speak when they passed, just gave a nod, and a small sound in her throat that might have been a blessing. The group moved slow, not solemn, but measured. No one hurried, no one looked back. They reached the ridge above the canyon by mid-morning. Mist still clung low in the creases of the land, as if reluctant to rise. The path down was narrow, the kind of trail only deer and memory knew, but the creature walked it without pause. like he'd been here before. Maybe in another season. Maybe in a dream. Then they saw him. Not moving, not calling, just standing there on the opposite slope. Not hidden, not afraid. Taller than any man, broader than any bull, wrapped in shadow and silence like a shroud. His presence made the air denser somehow, like the earth leaned toward him. The younger one saw him first. He stopped, not out of fear, out of recognition. His breath caught, shoulders dropped. He didn't speak, none of them did, but something in his stance shifted, a return to something older than language. The big one stepped forward slowly. The wind picked up, just enough to lift the hem of Hal's coat, to make May's scarf flutter in her lap. Then the wind changed direction, just slightly. And in that second, as the cold brushed across them, the larger figure moved between the gust and the younger one. Not dramatically, not long, just enough. A gesture, a shield, a father. The younger turned his head, looked back up the slope. Wren stood still, hands at her sides, lips parted. Briggs was beside her, tail stiff, not wagging now, just alert, watching. The creature raised his hand, not to wave, not to signal, just to say, "I remember." Then he turned, took 2 steps, paused, then walked into the mist, the larger figure following at a distance. Neither looked back again. No one spoke on the hike home. Hal's breath was heavier than usual, but he didn't complain. May stopped once to lean against a tree, but waved off help. The quiet between them wasn't heavy, just full. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and the shadows stretched across the yard like they always did this time of year, Wren sat on the porch with Briggs at her feet. She held the camera in her lap, but didn't lift it. Not yet. Hal came out with 2 mugs. Coffee for him, weak tea for her. He didn't sit, just stood near the rail, looking at the line of trees beyond the fence. His voice came low. "You see it too?" he asked. Wren didn't answer right away, then nodded. "It's different now," she said. "Yeah," Hal said. "It is." Down the hill, the cellar door stood open again, swaying gently in the breeze. A maple leaf caught on the threshold, twisting like it couldn't decide whether to enter or move on. Later that night, long after the porch light was off and the stove had burned low, Wren lay in bed with the quilt up to her chin. Briggs was curled on the floor. The window was cracked open just enough to let the wind in. She thought she heard something. Not close, not clear, just a breath. Drawn in slow and let out even slower, like the sound of someone who'd finally found where they were supposed to be, or someone watching, still, from just beyond the light. The spring of '89 came early to the edge of Imnaha, but not with songbirds or daffodils like in the postcards May sometimes taped to her kitchen window. It came quiet, low to the ground, through soft patches of moss and the hush of rain that no longer froze on the barn roof. The earth wasn't warm yet, but it had softened. You could smell it in the morning air, mud and grass, and the last of the snow melting under pine needles. And when Wren woke that morning, it wasn't the birds or wind that pulled her from sleep. It was Briggs. The old husky had risen before the light, not barking, not pacing, just sitting by the door, ears perked, breathing hard through his nose like he was trying to catch a memory. She didn't move at first, just watched him. He turned his head once toward her, then toward the window, then back again. There was something in his stillness that made her hold her breath. By the time she stepped out onto the porch, the light was soft gray, just enough to cast a shape along the eastern ridge. The world felt peeled open somehow, not exposed, just waiting. Briggs had trotted ahead, slow now with age, but determined. His tail hung low, not between his legs, but as if pulled by something heavier than gravity. Wren followed him past the shed, down the short slope where the cedar post fence lined the edge of the clearing. Her boots sank slightly in the wet grass. The sky hadn't fully broken open yet. Everything was pale. She stopped at the corner post, the one Hal had rehammered last fall. And then she saw him. He stood just beyond the fence line. Not hidden, not still, just there. Taller now, broader across the shoulders, fur darker, fuller. His leg no longer stiff, though she could still trace the line of scar just above the ankle where the old break had once turned purple beneath matted hair. His eyes were the same, deep-set, wide, not scared, not expectant, just watching. No sound passed between them, no gift, no branch, no offering left on the step, just presence. That was enough. Briggs eased forward, stopped at the fence, placed his nose between the slats. His breath came in short bursts now, tongue low, chest rising unevenly. But he didn't bark, didn't whine. He simply pressed his nose toward the familiar smell, toward the memory of warmth and dark rooms and quiet breathing. The Bigfoot lowered slightly, one hand resting on his own knee. He didn't reach through the fence. He didn't move at all. He just leaned close, face to face through wood, and exhaled. For a long moment, they sat like that. No motion, no sound. Just two old friends breathing in time. Wren didn't step closer. She knew better. Knew the space between mattered. This wasn't about her. This was theirs. The visits were rare that spring. Always unannounced. Never long. Always silent. The first one had lasted barely a minute. Then he turned, disappeared into the mist like smoke drawn back into the trees. But the pattern returned slowly. Once every few weeks, sometimes longer. He never touched the porch, never crossed the line of fence posts, just stood nearby and watched. And when Wren was lucky, he came with another. The second one was smaller. Not small, not young, not like he had once been, but clearly different. The first time Wren spotted the second, it was dusk. The woods were heavy with shadow and the smell of wet leaves. She'd been standing at the back of the barn when she felt the hush settle around her, like the birds had stopped too fast. When she turned, there were two figures in the tree line. The second was thinner, with shorter arms and a sloped neck, posture half-crouched. It never came close. Stayed tucked behind a cedar, halfway visible only because the fading light caught a bit of reddish fur around the ears. She didn't raise her camera, didn't move. And when they slipped back into the dark, her hands were still at her sides. The next time, the second one was closer. She could tell by the shape of the eyes. Not quite afraid. Not curious either. More like trying to understand the rules of something passed down in silence. The older one, hers, she still thought of him that way. Always kept one shoulder turned slightly toward the second. Not shielding, but marking. This is where you stand. This is what you don't touch. This is who you watch, but not too long. Wren never told May about the second one. Not Hal. Not even Tessa. It didn't feel like a secret. More like a promise she hadn't made out loud. Briggs slowed more that year. His back legs grew stiff in the mornings, and sometimes Wren had to help him up with an old towel looped under his hips. But every time the Bigfoot returned, Briggs knew before anyone else. He'd rise before dawn, sit by the window, tail thudding weakly against the floorboards. He wouldn't bark, just breathe heavier, and wait. The last time it happened that spring, the ground was thick with clover and wild mint. Wren had been hauling a bucket of water out to the goat pen when she heard the screen door creak open. She turned and saw Briggs push through it slowly, head low, ears up. He didn't look at her, just walked, each step slower than the last. He made it down the porch stairs, across the patch of gravel, then to the fence, and he lay down, right at the base of the post. Not in pain, not collapsed, just placed himself there with the care of someone choosing their breath. Wren didn't move. Her chest ached in that way it does when the truth shows up before words. He lay with his head between his front paws, nose pointed through the slats, toward nothing, or toward something only he could sense. She watched him breathe, counted each rise and fall. Then she saw it. A shadow moving through the green. Not fast, not bold, just a presence, the older one. He stopped in the same place he always did. Didn't approach. Didn't lower himself this time either. He stood, silent, watching. Briggs didn't raise his head, just stayed still, eyes half closed, chest moving with soft rhythm. The same rhythm he had learned years ago, next to a body not quite human, under dirt walls and low light. Wren knelt beside him, ran her hand gently along the scruff of his neck. No words, not even a whisper. The Bigfoot remained for nearly 4 minutes that day. Then he turned and walked away. Briggs stayed there another minute. Then 2. Then he stood, shaky, took one last breath through the fence, and walked back to the porch without looking back. Later that night, Wren placed her hand on the spot where he had rested, felt the warmth still in the earth. The sky above had turned lavender, then black. The air was thick with frog song and the rustle of animals not meant to be seen. But that night no voice called out, no howl echoed through the trees. Just the hush of something complete, not finished, but whole. It started with heat that didn't let go after sunset, the kind that stayed pressed against your skin long after the light was gone, like a warning baked into the soil. By the second week of July, the creek below the orchard had thinned to a slow trickle, and the ferns along the north ridge had started curling in on themselves like they knew what was coming. Dust coated the leaves. The breeze turned metallic. The old folks in town said the land remembered fire before people did. And when Hal Carter stepped out onto the porch that morning and tasted smoke on the back of his tongue, he didn't say a word, just tightened the laces on his boots. Wren had been sleeping with the window open. She woke to the crackle of dry branches and the far-off whine of a distant siren, too faint to place. It wasn't panic that stirred her. It was the smell, not of fire itself, but the ache of what came before it. Ash still unborn. By noon, the sky wasn't sky anymore. It was a ceiling of pale brown haze, pressing low enough to make the light feel wrong. Shadows dulled, colors vanished. Even the birds fell quiet. May called from down the ridge to say the Forest Service had closed the southern trail, and smoke had started leaking through the canyon like something spilled from the belly of the world. Wren walked the fence line out of habit, one hand trailing along the dry cedar rails. Briggs followed at her side, slower now, grayer around the snout, but his eyes still sharp. He stopped suddenly near the north edge, stiffened, and stared toward the tree line. Wren turned with him. Nothing moved, no sound, but something was there. She could feel it in her chest. Not fear, not dread, just a shift. Then the wind changed. It rolled down fast, dragging with it the thick tang of wildfire and the brittle crack of branches snapping in places no one was walking. Wren turned. The smoke came fast, like a wave with no water. She shouted for Briggs, but the wind tore her voice sideways. Ash danced in the air now. Small at first, then thicker, then blinding. And that's when she saw it. A shape through the veil of smoke. Not running, not calling, just moving with precision, like it had done this before. The Bigfoot, taller now, broader, older, emerged not from panic, but from purpose. His fur was slick with heat, his eyes narrowed against the haze, and he didn't pause. He didn't speak. He just raised one long arm and motioned, not toward himself, not away, down, a slope Wren hadn't noticed before, masked by brush and bramble all these years. A deer trail? No, older, worn into the land like a scar. She didn't think. She followed. Briggs barked once behind her, more from confusion than command, then darted forward and took the lead. The Bigfoot stayed behind them, close but not touching, arms held slightly out as if guiding the smoke itself. The trail grew narrow, slick with ash, but Wren kept her footing. Her lungs burned, her ears rang. The heat became a sound. Then the world cracked. A dry pine exploded on the ridge behind them, flame leaping so high it disappeared into cloud. They didn't turn back. The path curved hard beneath a crumbled bluff. down into a hollow so dense with stone and shadow that even the smoke seemed to hesitate. And there it was, a spring. Not wide, not deep, but enough. Water gurgled beneath cracked limestone, wet roots trailing into the soil like veins. The air there was damp, cold, still. The Bigfoot crouched beside it, shoulders heaving. Not from exhaustion, from restraint. He didn't look at Wren. He didn't look at Briggs. He looked toward the ridge, where fire licked the top of the pines in orange streaks. The path had closed behind them. Branches had fallen. Ash coated the grass in gray. But the fire didn't follow. They waited, long enough for Wren's legs to ache from stillness. Long enough for the smoke to thin, for the sky to glow less red and more gold. Long enough for breath to settle. When they emerged, it was dusk. The fire had moved on, veering east where the ridge split, away from the house, away from the barn. Somehow, the lower orchard still stood. The fence was scorched but not burned. The cellar roof was blackened but intact. Wren stepped onto the porch as Hal came around from the shed, boots sooty, shirt stained. He opened his mouth to ask something, then stopped. He saw Briggs first, covered in soot, panting, eyes glassy. Then he saw the girl. Then he saw the footprints behind her. They weren't all hers, and they didn't come close to the porch. They stopped where the earth dipped into the brush. 2 sets, one large, one massive. Side by side, Hal stood frozen, the old hammer still in his hand. Then he let it fall. It hit the porch boards with a dull clunk, and he rubbed at his eyes like something had gotten in them that wasn't smoke. God almighty, he whispered. We owe that back. Wren didn't speak. She just sat down on the top step, reached out, and let Briggs rest his head in her lap. He sighed, deep and slow, like the kind of breath you take when you've carried someone else's weight for too long. The sky above was no longer red, just soft, just quiet. And somewhere beyond the ridge, beyond the trees, beyond the place where paths are carved by hands no human remembers, something tall and silent stood still and watched the wind, just long enough to be sure the ones below had made it home. Then it turned and vanished between the smoke and the stars. Autumn folded in with less color than usual. The hills above Imnaha wore only a thin coat of gold that year, dry leaves rattling like bones in the thinning light. The wind shifted more often than it should have. Cool in the morning, heavy by noon, sharp at dusk. The creek had slowed to a crawl, and the sky above felt taller, stretched like old cloth. Change had a smell to it. Not rot, not bloom, just fading. And folks who lived long enough out here knew how to tell when a season wasn't only turning, it was thinning out, like skin over old knuckles. Briggs was nearly all gray now, his ribs showing sharp when he stood too fast, which wasn't often. His eyes had fogged at the corners, not blind yet, just slower to catch the world. But each year, come spring, he still walked to the edge of the fence. Every time, without coaxing, without being called, like something older than habit had pressed it into his bones. Wren didn't live here full-time anymore. She was 24 now. She had work in the city, a roommate, a second-hand hatchback, a life with too many clocks and too much light. But she always came back in spring. For him. For Hal. For something that didn't name itself but waited just the same. She brought her camera now. A real one. Not film. Hal grumbled about that. But she still carried the old one, too, in her pack, wrapped in soft cloth, just in case. May had started to forget things. Sometimes it was just the kettle left on, or the name of a neighbor's grandson. Other times it was her own house key, her own birthday. Wren found her once out back behind the woodshed, standing still with a watering can, not moving, eyes glazed as if watching a memory she couldn't quite catch. They didn't talk about it much, but the silence around it thickened, like fog that didn't lift after sunrise. Hal walked slower these days. His knees had betrayed him years back, and the cold made them mean. But he still moved with that stubborn steadiness. Same boots, same hat, same watch on a chain looped through his belt. He never said it, but Wren knew he was measuring time now in other ways. How long it took the sap to rise, how early the frost bit, how few birds returned to the ridge each march, and how Briggs began to limp the way Hal did, like they'd agreed on it quietly. That fall, Wren came home earlier than usual. She said it was to check on the roof. Said her landlord gave her a week off between jobs. Said traffic was unbearable. But none of that was true. Something had shifted inside her, like a thread pulled too tight in the middle of the night. She found herself waking with the weight of smoke in her chest again, even though the fire had passed years ago. And she kept thinking about breath. Whose it was. Who still shared it? One night, just after the last of the tomatoes had gone soft on the vine and the night started whispering of frost, it happened. She'd left the porch light off, like always. The stars above hung heavy, too many to name, sharp against the ink-black sky. Briggs had been sleeping near the hearth, his breaths shallow but even. Wren sat on the floor beside him, one hand resting on his shoulder, feeling each rise and fall like a metronome that might pause at any moment. Hal had gone to bed early. May, too, after repeating the same story twice over about a summer carnival that never really happened. Then she heard it. Not a knock, not a sound, just a difference in the air, a shift. She rose slowly, barefoot, blanket still draped over her shoulders. She didn't wake Hal, didn't grab the flashlight. She just stepped to the door, eased it open, and looked out across the porch. There, beyond the yard, where the grass met the hard edge of the woods, was a shape. Not moving, not loud, just standing. The same height, the same stillness. Time had passed, yes. But some things held. This one had grown broader through the chest, thicker across the shoulders, but the posture remained. The quiet curve of the back, the slight dip of the chin, the weight balanced not in tension but readiness. A watcher, not of danger, of presence. She didn't speak. Neither did he. The space between them was thinner now, but not in distance. The moment held for longer than a heartbeat, longer than a breath. Then he turned, walked into the trees, but the air didn't settle. The next morning, as the frost clung to the porch rail, Wren followed a pull she couldn't name. Not toward the woods, not toward the trail, but toward the creek. Briggs followed, slowly. She stepped across the stones where the water once rushed, now barely murmuring. The light was still cold, slanting sideways through the bare limbs. And there, just past the bend, she saw it. A hollowed place in the earth, not dug, prepared, dry, clean, edged with small stones like someone had tried to mark it without disturbing the ground. Wren stood frozen. Briggs stepped forward. Not in fear, not with question, just calm. He turned in a slow circle, then lay down inside it. Not curled, not tense. He exhaled. She knelt beside him, tears already slipping past her chin before she knew they'd started. Her hands trembled as she stroked his muzzle, silver now with time. He didn't look at her. Didn't need to. The wind moved gently through the trees. The hollow was warm. She leaned close, pressed her forehead to his. "I won't hold you," she whispered. "If you're ready." He sighed once, then closed his eyes. When they returned to the cabin later, Hal didn't ask. He just took her hand in both of his and held it for a long time. May made tea she forgot she'd made. The fire cracked in the hearth. And outside, just past the fence, a pair of crows lifted from the maple tree at once, wing beats slow and steady, like a goodbye that didn't need to be spoken. But the air didn't close, not yet. The frost that spring came late, reluctant, like it didn't want to admit the season had changed. Snow had fallen once in February, thin and quickly forgotten, but March had been dry and gray, like a sky held in pause. Then, all at once, it broke. The light softened. The birds came back. The creek picked up its old rhythm, and the grass near the old shed, where the ground dipped just enough to catch morning sun, greened before anywhere else. Wren noticed it in early April, how the soil there always warmed first, how the shoots stood taller even before the rest of the yard woke up. She didn't say anything about it. She just watched. Some things didn't need to be spoken aloud anymore. 2 weeks earlier, she'd woken just past dawn with a heaviness in her chest that didn't feel like sleep. She rolled out of bed quietly, careful not to wake May in the room down the hall. Hal had already been up, standing at the window with a mug clutched tight in both hands, as if the ceramic was the only thing keeping the cold from entering him. He didn't turn when she joined him. Didn't need to. He just nodded slightly, like he'd known she'd come. Outside, the yard lay still, wrapped in the soft blue light of an early morning yet to make up its mind. Then it happened. The shape appeared without sound. No rustle, no creak, no warning. Just there, at the window. Not on the edge of the woods this time. Not beyond the fence. Right there, standing no more than a breath away from the glass, framed by fog, massive, motionless. Its eyes didn't dart. Its shoulders didn't shift. It didn't knock. It didn't move. It simply stood with a presence too still to be mistaken, too heavy to be ignored. Behind it, the trees blurred into pale smoke, and the sky behind them held no color. The light hadn't chosen sides yet. Briggs had not barked. He'd tried to rise. Once. Wren had heard the slow shuffle of his paws against the wood floor before she reached the window. Now he stood there beside her, unsteady, breathing through his nose with short, fragile bursts. His legs trembled as he stepped forward, inch by inch, until his nose brushed the window pane. His fur stuck up in odd patches. His back swayed. He didn't whimper, didn't move again, just stood there. And the creature, no longer juvenile, no longer something guessed at, now fully formed, fully grown, fully still, leaned ever so slightly forward until the fog from its breath met the dogs through the glass. 2 clouds, one small, one vast, and between them, a window barely old enough to remember the house before Wren could speak. No one blinked. No one stepped closer. Briggs pressed his muzzle to the window, soft. The creature did not flinch. Time paused in that breath. Then, with the quiet grace of something never rushed, it stepped back. 1 step, then 2. The light shifted slightly. A breeze, maybe. The kind that doesn't touch your skin but brushes past your memory. And then, it was gone. Not vanished, not fled. Just gone. As if it had never wanted to be caught. Just acknowledged. Briggs exhaled, body swaying. Wren dropped to her knees beside him, arms catching him before he fell. He didn't collapse. He didn't struggle. He leaned into her as if knowing it was the last time his bones would ask to be held. Later that day, he didn't eat. By evening, he hadn't moved from his spot beside the porch. Hal offered to carry him in. Wren shook her head. "No," she said. "He wants to stay here." And so they made a bed out of folded quilts and cedar boughs. May left a glass jar of water beside it, even though she forgot why a few minutes later. The night came in slow, and with it, a stillness that settled not only in the house, but under the skin. At sunrise, Wren sat beside him. His breathing was shallow, thin. She held his paw in her hand, not too tight. And when it happened, when the last breath left him, it was so gentle, so quiet. She almost missed it. He simply stopped. No final gasp, no twitch, just stillness. A kind of stillness the world doesn't make anymore. Hal built the box himself. Said the store-bought ones never fit right. Said if a dog spent 15 winters guarding your fence line, the least you could do was honor his shape. May gathered wildflowers, forgetting what they were called, but carrying them in bundles anyway. Wren chose the spot, the hill just behind the barn, the one that looked out toward Imnaha Canyon, the one where the grass always turned green first. She didn't explain why. No one asked. They buried him before noon. Hal said a few words. May hummed an old hymn she never remembered learning, and Wren placed her hand on the mound, warm from the morning light. That night it rained a little, just enough to soften the ground. By the next week, tiny shoots had sprung from the soil, faster, thicker, brighter than the rest of the yard. Even the clover returned first there. Hal said it was because of the drainage. May said it was because of the sunlight. Wren said nothing. She just stood there, hands in her pockets, watching. In early May, when the clouds were thin and the light stretched longer into the evenings, Wren stood in the dark room Hal had built from an old storage shed. The air smelled like vinegar and paper. Her hands worked from memory now, rinsing, soaking, clipping. The photograph she'd developed was older, from last summer, taken through a thin strip of glass where the light bent just wrong. She hadn't noticed it before. In the background, behind the edge of the cabin, just barely in frame, was a sliver of reflection, a blurred shimmer, a flash of something not quite explainable. She leaned closer. It wasn't Briggs, wasn't Hal, wasn't her. A shape, half lit, eyes just off-center, watching. Not accidental, not staged, just seen. She didn't speak, didn't label it, didn't hang it on the wall. She slid it into an envelope, folded it in half, and tucked it into the pages of her old journal. Then she stepped outside. The sky had turned soft gold. The grass on the hill shimmered, greener than she remembered. She reached for the post near the porch, the one Briggs always leaned on. The cedar was worn smooth now. She lifted the old red collar from her pocket. The brass tag dulled with age. She didn't wipe it clean. She hung it on the hook and stepped back. The wind shifted, and from the edge of the woods, just for a moment, came a breath, long, steady, familiar. She didn't turn toward it. She just closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you, not for watching, not for returning, but for remembering." And behind her, the tag swayed gently. No sound, just rhythm. And above them all, the valley held its breath one last time before spring turned fully forward. And the story, though finished, left its breath behind. There are stories that never ask to be told, only remembered. Stories that don't shout, but hum low through the trees, in the hush of twilight, in the spaces between one heartbeat and the next. They live not in books or photographs, but in gestures. The pause at a fence post, the warmth of shared silence, the quiet return of something long lost but never gone. These aren't tales about beasts or myths. They're about belonging, about the invisible threads that tie soul to soil, creature to creature, time to memory. About how love, in its truest form, does not need words, does not need understanding, only presence, only care. Sometimes the ones we think need saving are the very ones keeping us from vanishing. Sometimes, what the world calls wild, knows more about mercy than we do. And sometimes, just sometimes, the smallest acts of gentleness ripple farther than thunder. In the end, it's not about who found who. It's about who stayed, who listened, who didn't run when silence stretched long, and who, against all odds, made room for another breath beside their own. Maybe that's the kind of legacy that matters most. Not the monuments we build, but the spaces we protect. Not the voices that echo loudest, but the lives that chose to listen. Because the truest stories don't end with a goodbye. They settle into the land, into the rhythm of footfalls on softened earth, into the wind that brushes the back of your neck when no one is there. They wait. They watch. And if you're quiet enough, they answer. If this story stirred something in you, something wordless, something honest, let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts, your memories, or simply the feeling it left behind. And if you'd like to follow more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tap the bell so you won't miss what's still to come. Thank you from the deepest part of the woods and from all the quiet places in between.